From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons. Donald Trump officially nominates Doug Burgum for Interior Secretary and names him as the chair of a new National Energy Council, capping a week of rapid-fire nominations for posts in his second administration, and it's not over yet. We'll get reaction to Trump's picks from our political panel and House Ways and Means Committee member, Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin. Plus, Mary Lovely of the Peterson Institute will join me, with President Biden set to meet with China's Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Peru tomorrow. But we begin on this Friday evening with the latest name on the cabinet list, Doug Burgum. Donald Trump teased the announcement last night to a black tie audience at Mar-a-Lago.
He's going to be announced tomorrow, and we have somebody else that's probably coming up with him to be announced, who's a big one. And we're going to do things with energy and with land, interior, that is going to be incredible. And so I look forward to doing the formal announcement, although this is a pretty big announcement right now. Actually, he's going to head the Department of Interior, and he's going to be fantastic.
We didn't even need the press statement to drop. I'm joined now by Bloomberg's Scully and Gregory Korte, as we did get that formal statement today. And not only is it the Department of Interior, which Donald Trump told us last night, but also chair of this new Energy Council. Gregory, why does he need to be both things? Yeah, it's a little bit of a title bump. Doug Burgum ran against Trump in the Republican primaries, but he ran a very pro-Trump campaign. Trump kind of took a liking to him, especially with his wife as well. And wanted to give him a prominent position. Energy would have been a good fit, but it turns out that in the federal government, Interior actually has just as much sway over energy policy, especially sort of the fossil fuels that are underneath these public lands, as the Energy Department. But giving him this expanded role in the National Energy Council, I guess, presumably it's something similar to the Domestic Policy Council, the National Security Council. It's a sub-cabinet of departments of the federal government that will deal with energy issues, and so giving Burgum an outsized role in energy policy. And Burgum also is one of the more measured, shall we say, names that we have on this list. You've got your Doug Burgums and your Marco Rubios, for example, people who are more establishment, sandwiched in there with the Matt Gaetzes and Tulsi Gabbards and others. Absolutely. So I see, I think Burgum and Rubio will be met with open arms on Capitol Hill when it comes time for confirmation. The others might have a bit rockier of a path. Well, I actually discussed that future path in the Senate, specifically when it comes to Matt Gaetz yesterday, when I spoke with someone in Republican leadership, the West Virginia Senator Shelley Moore Capito, about that controversial pick. And this is what she told us last night.
We have a process here. We have to go through committee. It has to go through the Judiciary Committee. And so we're a long way from really seeing how this whole thing will end up in the end. But I think we should give due diligence to every single one of the president's appointees, and we should do it quickly. And that due diligence might include figuring out what's in the Ethics Committee report in the House that now may not be formally issued because Matt Gaetz resigned after he was nominated AG. What exactly is going to happen here? This is like the most sought after document in Washington right now. Everybody wants to know what is in this. And House Speaker Mike Johnson said we should not be releasing this. This sets a bad precedent to be releasing something on a former member, since Matt Gaetz is a newly former member of the House. But this was it is a bipartisan report, and things don't tend to stay secret on Capitol Hill for very long. It is floating out there. I suspect that we'll see it in some capacity, probably before too long. Senators are talking about perhaps, if it doesn't get leaked, seeing it in some kind of a closed setting so that they can evaluate leading up to the confirmation hearings.
we'll see what happens. But everybody wants to see what is in this.
Well, and everybody wants to see how Senate leadership really navigates not just this, but other controversial picks like RFK Jr. for HHS. Gregory, some are saying this is a loyalty test or could be seen as such for the now incoming majority leader in the Senate, John Thune. Or is this strategy? Donald Trump knows these nominations are going down, so he can slide in someone after the fact that's going to end up looking like a hero.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me in that snippet from Senator Capito was talking about there's a process for this. And the process can be a friend to these nominees or it can be the enemy, because the process means each of them is going to get a respectful hearing. Each of them may get if it gets that, a vote up or down. It'll be a vote up. If it's going to be a vote down, they might just pull the nomination. But the process also means FBI background checks. It means things like seeking this ethics committee report. And it means investigating the record of somebody like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. What are his plans for the Department of HHS? What does he think about vaccines? How does that conflict with the science that has been universally accepted around vaccines and food and medicine over the past few decades? So the process could go either way.
Well, and it could take some time, theoretically. The other thing we heard from Senator Capito last night, we've been hearing from a lot of lawmakers, is that this should happen quickly, that the president has a mandate to leave and to have those he wants close to him be close to him early in the administration. What realistic timeline are we looking at for the processing of all of these?
So I think we're going to see confirmation hearings in the first weeks of January leading up to the inauguration, which, of course, is January 20th. During the first Trump term, we saw, I believe it was Mattis and maybe one or two others who were confirmed on the day of the inauguration. I think they're hoping for that kind of cadence. Maybe Doug Burgum could get confirmed and we will have a Secretary of the Interior in place on January 20th. I'm not entirely sure about Attorney General or some of these other picks. Process. That is what we are hearing from Senate Republicans right now. It's what we heard from Senator Thune last night in his interview on Fox News. It's what we've heard from Senator Cornyn, and they're going to be reluctant to give up the steering wheel on this. Although I will say, I think it is hard for them. It will be hard for Senate Republicans to bat away 4 nominees, maybe 1 or 2 sacrificial lambs. But, when you look at the universe, and I think, there are about 4 that are generating the most agita right now. And I think there'll be some strategic picking and choosing.
Well, and they're still picking and choosing to be done for Donald Trump, like Treasury Secretary, which we've all been waiting for. I know it's only been a week and change, Gregory, but this week feels like it has lasted for a month. And we all keep thinking we're getting close to a Treasury pick because he talked about the economy so much on the campaign trail. So why is he waiting so long to announce his economic team?
Yeah, that's a good question. And back in 1992, Bill Clinton campaigned on It's the Economy's Stupid, and he put a priority on getting his economic team in place, perhaps even to the exclusion of equally important national security picks. Here, Trump has done it the other way around, despite campaigning on the economy. It may be in large part due to the team of rivals sort of effect that's going on here with a lot of people vying for the job. We understand that 2 of the finalists for this are Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick, 2 Wall Street heavyweights, each have their own allies and people who are lobbying for them. Trump likes that kind of auditioning for the role. After all, he was on TV on The Apprentice, getting people to compete for jobs. But there's a limit to that. And reportedly, what we're hearing is he's getting a little frustrated with that process and now seeking out other names. So this short list may even be growing. And he might be seeking some name we may even not have heard of yet.
If the names on that list don't end up being Treasury Secretary, are we likely to see them with a different role in the administration, whether at the National Economic Council or Council of Economic Advisors? Or if you don't make the Treasury Secretary position after lobbying so hard for it, is that a sign that Trump is saying, all right, you will not have a role in this administration?
If you're the head of an investment bank or a Wall Street titan, Director of the National Economic Council does not have exactly the same ring to it as Treasury Secretary. There's also the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. There are some key economic roles that the president does have. U.S. Trade Representative. Robert Lighthizer was in that role in the first administration and may be looking for promotion into Treasury Secretary, too, which is another factor that's complicating this. Everybody wants that top job. Treasury is most prominent, but whoever doesn't get that might not be willing to take what's perceived as a lesser role in the White House.
And just quickly here, Megan, basically all the House wants is to make sure that this is not someone pulled from the House, right?
Right. We're getting awfully close to. We don't have the final count for the House, but we do know it will be a narrow Republican majority. We already have Matt Gaetz now, who has stepped aside. We have at least 2 picks from the House. And if I were Mike Johnson, I'd be getting a little nervous about that majority and the Speaker vote come January.
Everybody's watching the numbers. Bloomberg's Megan Scully and Gregory Korte, thank you both so much. And still ahead, we'll get reaction to the presidential transition thus far from Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin, a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. Next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Matt Gaetz, Attorney General. Wow. It is just stunningly bizarre, especially you'd think that Donald Trump, who says we should have openness with the American people, isn't demanding that the Ethics Committee investigation, which was supposed to report today and might still report today, that report isn't made public.
Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman of California on today's early edition of Balance of Power, reacting to the nomination of Matt Gaetz for Attorney General and the questions swirling around the ethics investigation into him now that he's resigned from the House. For more, I'm joined now on Bloomberg TV and radio by a still current member of the House, Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin, a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. Thank you so much for being here on the late edition of Balance of Power, Congresswoman. Obviously, the ethics report to this point has not been released. Are you confident that it will be, or at the very least, the senators who would like to see the content will be able to do so?
Thank you for having me, Kaylee. I'm not sure that the report will be released. Apparently, there's a lot of effort on the part of the Speaker of the House to not have it released. Matt Gaetz seems to be working behind the scenes to do everything to keep it from being released. And I mean, he has the approval of the President of the United States, who has really threatened senators not to defy him in this confirmation process. He wants recess appointments, and it is not clear to me that Matt Gaetz will not be confirmed as Attorney General of the United States of America. Bizarre, to quote Brad Sherman.
Yeah, I think it raised a lot of eyebrows, Congresswoman. The Speaker, though, has suggested the reason this report shouldn't be released is because it sets a bad precedent to release a formal report about someone who is no longer a member. Is there a precedent question here?
There has been a precedent. I think Matt Gaetz conveniently resigned after winning re-election. I think that if he were just going to leave and walk away, that would be one thing. But he has resigned in order to be considered for the Attorney General of the United States, heading up the Justice Department, with allegations that he was engaged in sex trafficking, rape, disqualifying things for me themselves. I'm not a senator, but if I were a senator, Democrat or Republican, I would want to see that report. And, you know,
Gaetz, of course, has... Sorry to interrupt you, Congresswoman. Gaetz has denied these allegations. I guess we'll all have to wait to learn more. But what we do know is that he will not be in the House any longer in this Congress to cast a vote on the business that you still have to get done, including the funding of the government beyond the deadline in December. Is it more likely we end up with a continuing resolution, another kicking of the can down the road into the next Congress? Or are we actually going to get funding done either through separate bills or one big giant one?
Well, I would hope that we would have at least one more continuing resolution. I mean, we have just only a few days to consider these things. But I do know that the 119th Congress will be very, very consequential. You know, elections have consequences. And I'll tell you, last Tuesday night, I was so willing to be bipartisan and to try to work closely with my newest colleagues. But I tell you, this is just a bridge too far. And you would think that I wouldn't feel that way. I mean, there are a couple of Democrats that are part of these congressional picks that has me scratching my head. I'm thinking of Kennedy, Robert Kennedy Jr., for example. I mean, we have 83 children who died of measles because he advised Samoa not to do a vaccination program. Tulsi Gabbard, the National Intelligence Director, with ties to Putin and Syria, and certainly not qualified to do those things. It is very, very concerning. You know, we haven't seen the financial picks yet, but I am very concerned about the best of these nominations, I would say. Marco Rubio, and he's such a hawk on China that I think that that's going to feed into the tariffs and the China war. And those people who voted for President Donald Trump because of their economic woe, 52% of Americans say that they feel strained. Just wait until we have these tariffs. We'll for sure see the next recession roll in. So I certainly hope that the Senate becomes the sort of cooling platter that they're supposed to be. Because from defense and intelligence and the attorney general and what we've seen so far, it is, can I borrow Brad Sherman's nomenclature, bizarre. And I mean, you know,
well, Congresswoman, I'd like to pick up on your tariffs point, because you do sit on the Ways and Means Committee, and Donald Trump would argue part of those tariffs is not just about balancing out what he sees as fair trade with China. It is about helping to fill the Treasury's coffers. Instead, when he has tax cuts he would like to deliver, he says tariffs will offset that. You sit on the committee that looks at this. To what extent is that true?
Well, you know, I can only go by history. You know, I'm looking at 1932, 33. When we imposed tariffs and we went into the Great Depression. So, you know, I only have history to advise me. Certainly the supply chain, I mean, if the pandemic was any indication of what it's like to just have that be a problem, we'll see supply chain problems, prices will be greater, and you know, as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, we don't specifically have control over tariffs. That would be a presidential matter. And that is why it's so important for the Senate to be very careful. And that they vet these people. What concerns me the most now is that the president has demanded that they allow recess appointments. And is really asking the United States Senate to really stand down from doing their job. And I think that this is a really important time for the GOP controlled Senate to stand up for its own institution. And if they don't, it's going to be a wild, wild ride.
Well, we're all along for it, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for joining me here on Balance of Power. Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin. Appreciate your time. Coming up, why one Federal Reserve Bank president isn't ruling out another rate cut next month. Bloomberg's Michael McKee joins us live from Boston next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think we're going to be looking at rates coming down over the next year along the lines of what the dot plot said. So I still think we have a long way to go down with rates. There's some dispute about what is the neutral rate at which we're going to settle down. If there's disagreement about that we don't just charge right to it, that we slow the pace as we get toward it.
Chicago Federal Reserve President Austin Goolsbee discussing the pace of interest rate cuts over the next year with Bloomberg's very own Michael McKee earlier today. And Mike also spoke with Boston Fed President Susan Collins this morning and is joining us live from Boston now with more. So, Mike, what'd she tell you?
Well, you know, we've had a lot of wailing and gnashing of yields on Wall Street as traders get worried that the Fed might pause in December. The Fed funds futures have backed away from the idea of a rate cut. It's about 50-50 right now. But Goolsbee and Collins suggested that they are still on track for a rate cut unless they get some additional bad news. Here's what Susan Collins said she's seeing in the economy after a week where we got some tough inflation news.
I'm not seeing evidence of new price pressures. And so I think it's important to stay the course. I do see the policy stance as being in a restrictive place. And over time, normalizing that, I think, is going to be important.
Speaking of normalizing, a lot of questions to both of them about what they might see going forward under the new president's administration. And both of them, Kayleigh, ducking the question, saying we don't know enough about what Mr. Trump might do, so we can't really incorporate it into our forecasts.
Well, what they can incorporate into at least their decision for December is the news they get. Mike, you said unless they get more bad news. What kind of bad news are they likely to react to, on the inflation side or on the labor side?
Well, we've got important numbers on both sides coming out. The CPI, there'll be another CPI. There'll be the PCE inflation numbers before the next Fed meeting. And we'll get the November payroll numbers on December 6th. So any kind of weak payroll report would probably push them in the direction of another rate cut. But another CPI like we got, another strong inflation report that suggests that they're stalled above 2%, might keep them from moving. They might want to keep the pressure on. Interesting thing we're going to get in December is a new summary of economic projections. They'll put out their new forecasts, and we will get a new dot plot. The question is, will those have any shelf life at all with the Trump administration coming to town?
Well, it's an excellent point. We have questions of the shelf life of the people who make up the Federal Reserve Board and the FOMC in general under a Trump administration. Mike, do you sense any real fear among them that they could be fired or demoted under Trump, or do they trust the laws on their side on that one?
They trust the laws on their side. Now, neither Goolsbee nor Collins could be fired by the president. Regional Fed Bank presidents are hired by the regional Fed Bank boards. The president has no say. It's the Board of Governors on which the president weighs in nominating people to those boards. But there seems to be a fairly strong legal case, which Powell referenced, that the president has a role in naming them to the board, but doesn't have any role in removing them except for cause or malfeasance.
All right, Bloomberg's Michael McKee, live in Boston. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. Coming up, President Biden set to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Peru tomorrow. We'll have a preview with Mary Lovely of the Peterson Institute next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. As President Biden is set to meet with China's President Xi Jinping in Peru this weekend, the incoming administration's threat of tariffs against Beijing looms large. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has those details for us. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Kayleigh. Today at the APEC summit, China's President Xi Jinping warned against efforts to unwind globalization in the leader's first major remarks since the U.S. election. President-elect Trump has threatened a 10 to 20% tariff across the board, at least 60% against Chinese imports, and anywhere from 25 to 100% on Mexican goods. In an exclusive with Bloomberg earlier, Guggenheim's Jim Milstein says he thinks the policy could help boost domestic industry.
The China relationship is entirely different. That's, I think, a strategic choice to use tariffs to try to onshore critical industries back to the United States, critical defense industries back to the United States. Vis-a-vis the rest of the world, Europe and our other allies, he'll use those in a way to try to create reciprocity.
Bloomberg Economics estimates that if a 20% tariff across the board and a 60% tariff on Chinese imports goes into place, the U.S.'s share of world trade would be slashed by more than $10 percentage points by 2028. And if that same scenario is kept in place, our models also predict the average U.S. tariff would jump to 20%. That is well above what has been decades of sub 5% rates. Numbers like these raise concerns about potential inflationary impacts. Now, the future of economic ties with China is a big topic here in Washington. Just this week, the GOP chair of the House China Select Committee introduced legislation that could revoke normal trade relations with Beijing if passed. Now, Kaylee, you spoke with a member of that committee today, Republican Congresswoman Ashley Hinson, who says lawmakers need to strike a balance.
We still need to be able to sell our products to China, so I want to be cognizant of that in any stance that we take. I think we do need to be signaling, though, that we're ready to get tough on them, right? If you don't play by the rules and you don't start playing on a level playing field and you continue with these malign practices, then there are going to be some consequences there.
Kaylee, it's important to note the Biden administration kept in place most of the tariffs from the first Trump administration, and earlier this year announced hikes on an additional $18 billion in Chinese goods.
Indeed, they did. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, thank you so much. And we want to get more on this now and turn to Mary Lovely. She is senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and is with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Mary, before we can look ahead to the next administration, we do have to finish out this one. And President Biden, for the third time of his presidency, will sit down with Xi Jinping tomorrow. I just wonder what the point is when he's out of office in 2 months. What reasonably can be accomplished?
I think that's a valid question, Kaylee. I think that he will try to ensure that several things that happened under his administration, namely military-to-military communications being reestablished, they had deteriorated badly under the first Trump administration, Chinese cooperation on fentanyl interdiction, that continues. But of course, once he's out of office, he really has very little control over U.S.-China relations. So I think we're right to ask, what is actually the purpose of this?
Well, and when we talk about those areas where we are still seeing cooperation with China or have seen progress being made in communication when it comes to the military and other things, do you expect the president-elect would like to see those efforts continue? It's not just trade we're considering here, but other aspects of the relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, I think he would like to see particularly the, assistance on fentanyl, but in his first administration, communication, military-to-military communication, agency-to-agency communication really deteriorated. So unless he's significantly changed his view on that, no, we don't see him putting that much effort into continuing these lines.
Well, OK, so let's talk about tariffs as well, because he certainly has talked a very big game in that regard. As Tyler mentioned, potentially 60% levies placed on all exports coming from China to the United States. Is that bluster to you, Mary, or do you think that might be real, not just a negotiating tactic?
You know, we don't take it as bluster, not after we've seen the trade war tariffs, which still are placed on about half of what we import from China. So no, we don't take it as bluster. On the other hand, I think that he is wading into a territory that is very fraught for American businesses. Few people realize that many of the things that we import from China, in fact, the majority, are inputs that our manufacturers use. Driving up those costs is really going to hurt American manufacturers, many of whom are not ready to get them from other alternative sources, particularly domestic sources. One of the people you interviewed said that the tariffs were going to be used to onshore critical defense industries. I'd really like to know what these industries are. We're already under the CHIPS Act trying to reshore semiconductors. And of course, in the defense sector, we have been preferencing domestic sourcing forever. So what exactly are they talking about? What we know is going to be hit and hasn't been hit is consumer electronics. Also, these are things that many businesses use, so laptops, desktops, et cetera, along with cell phones. And these are going to drive up costs for American consumers and American businesses.
Well, and obviously it could have consequences for Chinese businesses as well. And Mary, I wonder how you view the reaction function of China here. If higher tariffs go into place, are they actually likely to change their approach when it comes to capacity or overcapacity, as the U.S. is concerned about, and start actually pulling back on some of that? Are they actually likely to stimulate even further because there will be an economic hit here, and so they might throw even more money at some of these industries?
I mean, I think you're thinking along the right lines. Exports to the United States are a very small share of their manufacturing sector. So in some sense, they may not care. The things that they want from the United States, which would be removal of the semiconductor export controls or access to our EV market, are simply not on the table. So in one sense, they have simply concluded that the U.S. is done with China, and they may, in fact, they're just done with the U.S. So it's not clear how they will respond, what their reaction function is in this environment. If we look back at what Biden's policies were for Trump, in many cases, they were continuations or even extensions of Trump's policies. So he added taxes on new energy. He has placed a large number of companies under financial or economic sanctions. And he has, of course, had the export controls on advanced semiconductors, which have really impinged on China's quest for upgrading its technology. So the answer may be there really is nothing that the Chinese want. Right now, their economy is, as you said, in a rough patch, to put it nicely. And they may decide that putting tariffs of their own is just, going to shoot themselves in the foot.
Well, but I do wonder what other markets China would look toward in the scenario that trade was severely reduced, if not outright completely decoupled from the United States. Are there other areas where these goods will reasonably go, and therefore, the capacity is still being put out there in the global market? And what does the U.S. do then?
Oh, yes. I mean, their share of global manufactured goods hasn't changed since 2016. So, yes, it is going to other places, and we've charted this out. So first, China itself has really diversified both where it gets its imports and where it sells its exports. So it's made itself less vulnerable to the United States. Its exports, as you said, they have to go somewhere. Where are they going? They're going to middle income countries, mostly. Other countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, South America, parts of Africa, so low-income countries. So they've been, in a sense, shifting for quite some time, but particularly since the U.S.-China trade war.
Well, and I do wonder as well about China's relationship, trade or strategic or otherwise, that I would imagine could come up in the meeting with Biden and Xi tomorrow, say the relationship with Russia, the relationship with Iran, that they're still buying a lot of oil from. How do those other adversaries work into this equation?
Well, the U.S. has financial sanctions on doing business with Russia that China's so far has been very careful about avoiding being caught in this net. Nevertheless, the U.S. has warned them about selling to Russia things that promote the war effort. But this is a very porous thing. They're selling tons of vehicles, tons of consumer electronics, electronic devices, which may find their way into drones and other things. So, it's a really hard line to draw, and China's probably right up against it. And I'm sure President Biden is talking about this. The war in Ukraine is of, key concern to him, as it is to our European allies. So I'm sure it's on the table. But China has pretty much charted its path, which is that it is deepening Russia's dependence on it. And that, I think, is what we're going to see continuing.
And that is the note we will leave it on. Mary, thanks for joining and bringing your expertise to us. Mary Lovely of the Peterson Institute. And still ahead, an early challenge for the new Senate Republican leadership, how to handle some of the more controversial picks by the president-elect for his administration. We're taking a look at the cabinet with tonight's panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Former administration former president, promised on the campaign trail that America would have the best economy, the best border security, and the best administration possible. And the question that we have to all ask, when we're confronted with nominations like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., are these the best individuals available?
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries reflecting on some of the top administration picks made by President-elect Donald Trump. For more on this, we're joined now by this evening's political panel here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency in Congress, alongside John Seaton, Republican strategist and founder and CEO of Echo Canyon Consulting. John, I'll come to you first because Hakeem Jeffries did ask a question as to whether or not these are the best candidates available. How would you answer that?
Well, it's great to be with you. And I do think that no one should be terribly surprised. When he was a candidate Trump was very clear that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., for example, would have a prominent role in his administration. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said much of the same thing. So this shouldn't be a surprise. This is what people voted for. And I do believe that the president-elect feels like he has a mandate. He won the popular vote as well as the Electoral College. He has a majority in the House and the Senate. So I think he's definitely feeling as though he has kind of free rein to build the government that he wants.
Well, and that's a really good point, Jeannie. Donald Trump was pretty transparent about those who were close to him during the campaign and would be close to him during an administration, and he won the popular vote, perhaps with the exception of Matt Gaetz. Should the American people really be surprised by his choices?
No, I totally agree with John. No surprises here. He said he was going to do it. He is doing it. But I also think that Hakeem Jeffries is asking the right question. Are these the best and the brightest? RFK Jr., he has a background in environmental law. Wouldn't he be better placed at a place like the EPA or something? But to put him in charge of HHS, given what he has said, his lack of expertise, in fact, what he has done, he's going to face grave questions about his actions in Samoa. The greatest accomplishments medically in the last 50 years, 100 years or more has been vaccination. And he is somebody who spreads wild mis and disinformation about that. So he's going to have a lot to answer for. But I do agree that Donald Trump said he was going to do it, and he's done it.
There's some things he hasn't done yet, though, including naming his economic team, John. This is what we've been waiting for here at Bloomberg. We want to know who the Treasury Secretary will be, who will sit on the NEC and CEA. Have yet to get those names, even though he campaigns on two issues, the economy being one, but the border being the other. And we did get some of those decisions first. Kristi Noem for DHS. Tom Homan's going to come back. Stephen Miller's going to have a role in the White House. And especially considering you spend so much of your time in border areas like Arizona,
Right.
What is your reaction to those picks?
Well, I think they're going to be very popular, not just amongst Republicans in Arizona, but I think there's going to be a good bit of cross-party appeal, bipartisan appeal in Arizona. It is always the top issue facing that particular state and the border states along our southern border. And so I think that he did promise a very hardline administration when it came to border security. I think he is delivering on that. And I have a feeling that before too long we'll be seeing the economic team come into place as well.
Well, I do wonder why it's taking us so long to see that economic team come into place, Jeannie. Is this all just part of the game, the apprentice-style Treasury selection?
Treasury was never so exciting, Kayleigh. I think that Donald Trump is likely still interviewing, still considering. It's hard to say how he is making these choices. The Gaetz choice seemed to come about in a way that we've never heard before. And so he probably just hasn't landed on who he wants. We know who he doesn't want, including Jamie Dimon, and we know who has pulled themselves out, including Paulson and a few others. So, I think Scott Bessent is the name that we keep hearing. But with Donald Trump, he always keeps us guessing. And I suppose we will be guessing until he slips it out, maybe at Mar-a-Lago or posts it on Truth Social.
Well, he keeps us guessing, and he cracks jokes as well, including at Mar-a-Lago, which he did last night at a black tie gala. He had a few words to say about Elon Musk specifically. Let's listen.
Elon Musk. Elon. What a job. What a job he does. And he happens to be a really good guy. He likes this place. I can't get him out of here. He just likes this place. And you know what? I like having him here, too.
Unclear if he's tried to get him out and he won't leave or if he really was just cracking a joke, John. But what we do know is Elon Musk and the president-elect have gotten very close to the extent that Elon Musk will now be partially in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency. But these are two big egos, if you will, that each on their own capture a lot of attention. And I wonder if at some point that's going to result in conflict.
Well, and I don't think that the former and president-elect is necessarily immune to conflict. I think he does enjoy some of the back and forth. He also likes to make clear that he is in charge. Look, what Elon Musk did, investing in America PAC and really building the ground game for the re-election campaign, really shouldn't go unstated. It was a very big deal. And I do think that the American people are very interested in seeing a government that is as efficient as possible with its dollars as families have to be with theirs. So I think it's probably a good fit for him, and it certainly won't be boring.
Jeannie, I'll let you get a final word in here on Musk because I know you have one.
You know I love to talk about Elon Musk. I think it's a test for our democracy when the wealthiest man who ever walked the earth decides he wants to get in on the political game. And I think we're going to see this played out as he warns Republicans, you vote against this administration, I will fund challenges against you. So it is a big, big test for democracy. And I am curious to see if he gets frustrated with the inability of government to respond as effectively as, say, Twitter or X when he calls for cuts.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see Musk's welcome to Washington. Jeannie and John will stay with me because coming up, we're turning to the current president who is set to meet with China's Xi Jinping in Peru tomorrow. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Writing has been on the wall for some time now that most policymakers in Washington feel that there needs to be a much tougher approach to China. Republicans, by and large, have been more aggressive and forward-leaning in their approach to that. So we should fully expect that that will be on the minds of members of Congress as well as on the mind of Donald Trump. Hopefully their ears will also be open to people who are pointing out the perhaps unintended consequences of the policies that they're considering and ways to mitigate them.
Anna Ashton of Ashton Analytics on the early Balance of Power today on the potential economic strife between the U.S. and China coming in the next year. But first, as we close out this year, President Biden will be meeting with China's Xi Jinping tomorrow in Peru. So back with us for final thoughts on that is our political panel, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and John Seaton. Jeannie, obviously Joe Biden is only going to be president for another 2 months, so it's a question really of what he wants to achieve with a meeting like this or his trip to APEC and then the G20 overall.
Yeah, you know, I think there's a few things. He, of course, wants to take a sort of victory lap, and I'm putting the word victory in quotes, and try to cement some of the policy initiatives that he's been able to work with China on, from the flow of fentanyl to climate change and climate issues. So I think he's going to be talking about that. But I think more importantly, it's going to be to underscore the need for continuing cooperation and communication, importantly, between these two countries, because transition times are fraught. They can be dangerous when you're dealing with competitors geopolitically. And so he needs to make sure that those lines of communication, particularly military to military, which have been strained at points in the last 4 years, remain open and in place.
When Biden came into office, John, he declared America is back. And I wonder, as he gets set to leave office, if you think that America is back and that it's staying.
It's a great question. I think that, he is very proud, obviously, of his 4 years in office. I think he very reluctantly stepped aside when he was urged to do so by members of his party. But I think he is very proud of his 4 years. And look, it's a job that he wanted for a very, very long time. Sure. It wasn't the first or the second time he'd run for the office. And so I think this is an opportunity. I don't know if I would call it a victory lap, but one last chance to try to cement his legacy and accentuate the need for communication with our Chinese counterparts. And I think that he's going to, do his best to run through the tape on January 20th.
Well, come January 20th, Jeannie, we have just about a minute left here. But how much foreign policy work done by Joe Biden do you expect Donald Trump could actually unwind? Because Donald Trump says, actually, I'm going to solve the problems in the world, from the war in Ukraine to the one in the Middle East.
Yeah, I think he's going to unwind a good deal. He made that clear. But on China specifically, there seems to be an awful lot of agreement. Biden kept the tariffs in place. We know that there will be more if Donald Trump has his way. And I think export controls as well. He might continue what Biden has been doing there. So on China, it's the one area of bipartisan agreement. I just think the Republicans are a bit more aggressive on that, and Trump will likely be as well.
Yep, it's popular to be a China hawk. Jeannie Shanzano and John Seaton, our political panel this evening. Thank you so much for joining me on this Friday as we close out a busy week in Washington. And of course, we have full coverage of all the happenings in Washington in the Washington Edition newsletter. You can find that on the terminal and online. Enjoy the weekend and come see us back here next week on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.